Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Thank you for joining me. This week's talk is called Frank and the Tutu, A Christmas Story. And it's a conversation about ill-fated relationships, the holidays, family dynamics, dating, divorce, single motherhood, whole bunch of topics here because I happen to be recording this during the holiday season, and I know a lot of people are visiting with family, and that can bring up all kinds of things, right? All kinds of emotions. Sometimes you go home and you can almost feel yourself regressing to like your 15-year-old self, no matter how much you've evolved and grown. Sometimes just being back in the house where you grew up, if that's where you are, with the people who kind of set up the motherboard, and know how to push those buttons. Sometimes you can just feel that, that younger version of yourself coming to the surface. And maybe you have a beautiful, wonderful relationship with your family of origin. And if that's the case, I'm so happy for you. And I hope that you really receive that as the incredible blessing that it is. But even in the best case scenarios, whenever you put a large group of people together, there are always going to be dynamics. There's always going to be a squeaky wheel somewhere, someone who maybe drinks more than would be ideal, or asks the intrusive question, or makes the joke that isn't so funny, or has political beliefs that go wildly against everything that you stand for. There's just always going to be something in the mix that makes it challenging. And so one of the things that the story that I was writing about this week, and I wanted to try to go a little bit light because it is the holidays, It wasn't the happiest story. It's the story of how I found out Santa isn't real. And, I don't know if Santa was part of your childhood or not, but this is a thing we're all going to find out at some point, those of us who did grow up hearing about Santa Claus coming down the chimney. And for me, what happened is my mom and my dad had separated, gotten divorced when I was 4. And my mom had kind of made it her mission, I think, to find a husband. And this was the 70s, and I think my mom was feeling like that was the best hope that she and I had for security and stability. And so she, pretty much, she was dating a lot, and I didn't meet very many people. She should just go out for dinner, and see if there was a connection or whatever. But I had met one boyfriend post-divorce who was very nice to me. I think he was really in love with my mother and thought, I was the best thing since sliced bread and all that. But she wasn't feeling it. And the next person I met after that was this guy, Frank. And I could tell that my mother she was really into him. I could tell, her face lit up when he was around, and I could just see that she was trying hard to make him happy and make it work. He had no interest in me at all. In fact, I would say he had negative interest. His interest in me involved like having me not be around. And I would hear him ask my mother, like, when is she going to her dad's? He just was not a kid person. And when he was over, he wanted me to be playing in my room with the door closed quietly so he could read the paper. He didn't ask me, about school, or he made zero effort to engage with me. And it was not lost on me. I was 6. I was aware of the fact that, this guy was not trying to be my friend and really just kind of wanted me to go away. And it was painful, and I so missed my mother when I was at my dad's, that when I would come home and then have to deal with this guy who basically wanted me to be in my room, it was not fun. And so it had escalated. It had been going on for a number of months, and Christmas came and Frank came over, and my mom had told me that Santa brought me a gift to give to Frank. And the gift was cigar cutters. And I remember, this whole scenario because I ended up at the time giving it a lot of thought. I was really confused about why Santa would bring me a gift to give to Frank instead of just Santa giving Frank the gift. But, I didn't really push back on that. And so Frank came over. He was not friendly or fun or in a Christmas vibe. And, and it just seemed like he was sort of like a guy going to the dentist. Like he just didn't want to be there. And so I gave him his gift. And then he gave me the gift that Santa had brought to him to give to me. This is what my 6-year-old self is believing. And I opened it up and it was this tutu that I had been really hoping for. It was like the one thing on my list to Santa that I actually was really invested in. And it was like a tutu that looked like Swan Lake. I had been taking ballet for 2 years by then. I was positive I was going to be a ballerina when I grew up. And so I wanted this tutu desperately. And there it was. And I was delighted and excited. And, I thanked Frank and I ran into my room to put it on. And my mom came in and said, when you're totally dressed, like go back out and give Frank a bigger thank you. And I said, well, I thanked him. And she said, yes, but give him a bigger thank you. That was expensive. He spent a lot of money. And I did not understand. And I said, well, what do you mean? It's from Santa. Like, I put it on my list. I got it because I was good. I know it's like Santa gave it to Frank to give to me, but like what do you mean Frank spent a lot of money? And my mom got frustrated. We went back and forth a couple of times, and I could see my mother getting really angry. And she was not someone there was no pushing back. Like you couldn't ask a follow-up question or, really be confused. You just had to do what you were being told to do. And so her fuse was short with that kind of thing. And so she got angry and she basically just said to me in anger, Santa isn't real. Frank bought you the tutu. March yourself out there and give him a big thank you. And I was shocked. And it wasn't, she told me in anger. So it wasn't like a good sort of like, hey, let's talk about this. It was just a very abrupt, that's over now. And I started to get emotional about it. And she said to me, do not cry and, go out there. So I didn't. And that was a big part of my relationship with her, was being taught to push things down. If I was upset, if I was angry, if I was confused, there really wasn't room for that. And she wasn't going to engage with that. And so I had to swallow those feelings. And I went down the hall and I thanked Frank, in a much more effusive way. But it was forced, and he was not even interested in my thank you. She asked me, she said, get in front of the tree so I can take a picture, which I did. And she asked Frank to get in the picture with me, and he wouldn't. And that was basically that. And then we went to my mother's brother and his wife, my aunt and uncle, for Christmas dinner. Frank went on his way. And when I arrived, my cousins, who were all older than I, it was like sort of the baby of the family, they were so excited. They, they obviously knew Santa Claus, they knew already, but they were excited to like have that with me. And so they piled out of the house, and I got out of the car and said, yeah, I know he isn't real and you can stop pretending. And they were devastated, and my uncle was very upset with my mom and said, she's 6. Like, why would why did you tell her? And she told him why. And I could see that she was embarrassed, that she felt maybe some shame about that and the way that it went down. But no one is perfect. Parenting is tough. My mother was, at the time, she was 28 when my parents split. So she would have been 30. And, I just think that she was doing the best that she could. She was doing the single mom thing in New York City. And this relationship she was having was being impeded by the fact that she had a kid. I think this guy, he liked her, but I think that he just didn't like her enough to deal with a child in tow. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal to date someone who has a kid. And not everybody's up for that. So, and I really, I also know what that is. I know what it is to be on the other side of a divorce and to have little kids. My kids were 1.5 and 4 when I split with my ex-husband, and and I didn't even attempt to date for 1.5 years. I mean, my daughter was still nursing, so there's just like I wasn't even in that mode. I just wanted to make sure my kids were okay. But when I did stick my toe back in that pool, there's no way I would have spent time with someone who wasn't going to enthusiastically receive my children with love and as a bonus to the situation, and not a drawback. Like, if that wasn't part of it, it was just a non-starter. But I was a lot older than my mom was when she was going through this stuff, and I think I just had many more emotional resources. And my children were so, I wanted them. I was so ready for them, and I wanted them so much. And they were, they're just the lights of my life. So there's no way I would be interested in someone who, wanted my kids to like stay in their rooms. It's like, that wouldn't have happened. But I don't judge my mom. I think she was really trying to figure it out. And, I do think that, if you find yourself in that situation post-divorce with children dating, it's a deal breaker. If someone is not excited about your children, you got to move along, and quickly, because it's no good for the kids, to have that sense of not being wanted and received with love, and you don't want to bring somebody like that into your home. So it's just not a good fit, right? But a lot of people find themselves in relationships, and whether there are kids involved or not, they don't end them when they know that they should. They don't end the relationship. They're tolerating treatment that doesn't feel good, or they're trying to, I was thinking about this, and I feel pretty certain that my mother bought that tutu for Frank and probably wrapped it and put it under the tree and wrote a little, card from Frank. I don't think Frank did anything at all. So there's my mother sort of going to these extreme efforts to kind of get what she wanted, which was for me and Frank to have some kind of connection. And, if you have to work that hard, first of all, you're trying to manage other people's feelings instead of accepting what is being presented to you. And I think a lot of people do that very thing. Someone is showing you who they are, right? Maya Angelou, somebody's showing you who they are, and you're not believing them. You're like, yeah, but you're different than that. You're better than that. I can help you, feel differently about this thing. No. No. If someone is showing you, I really not a kid person, believe them and move along, or if someone is showing you, let's say there are no kids in the picture, someone is showing you that your values are really different, your love language is really different, the things that are important to you are really, then move along. It's not going to be a good fit. You're not going to change people. You're not going to change someone's nature. You're not going to change someone's core beliefs or values. It's not to say, sometimes you meet people and you have such a deep connection that you start to think about things in a different way. That can happen, but you really don't want to be spending your time in a relationship trying to control, manage, cajole, manipulate. That's not like a healthy, thriving, growing thing. The most ideal scenario is that you sit back enough that you can let people show you who they are, and you can figure out whether it's going to work, whether who they are just as they arrive, as they show up in your life is a hit, is a yes. And if it isn't, to just, to accept that. And that tendency can show up. Even if you're in a healthy, beautiful, thriving relationship, the tendency to try to manage or control or fix or help or, try to make someone avoid discomfort, like that tendency can show up no matter how healthy your relationship is. If you grew up in a situation where there was a lot of uncertainty, certainly if you grew up in an alcoholic household, if you were parentified in any way, you're probably primed to be looking for trouble and trying to figure out how to manage that and keep the peace for everyone. And that was certainly me. And I was writing that I used to kill all my plants by overwatering them. That's a true story, and motherhood for me, the first 8, 9, 10 years, a lot of your work is diving in and saving the day. So, you want to make sure, obviously, your kids learn to hold your hand when you're walking on the street. You don't let them, step off the curb. You're literally making sure they survive. You're strapping them into their car seats. You're feeding them. You're making sure they're asleep. You're taking care of all of their primal needs all the time. And you are trying to teach them about the world and what's safe and what's not safe. And obviously you don't want them to get hurt. So that is your work, is to dive in and save the day, sometimes multiple times in a day when they're little. I don't even know how many times I use the phrase "watch your head" as my kids were growing. There's a mailbox on our street that is right at the height of a toddler head, and still to this day when we walk by, my kids laugh because they remember me, watch your head, and the one time I didn't say it, my daughter ran bam right into the mailbox. She was okay, but so that's your work. And then right around 10, you want to start to step back a little bit and not constantly save the day. Why? Because you want your children to start to take ownership of their own, well-being and their own happiness. So it's things like, I had this mom text chat from 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, where it was basically like a homework text chat where, okay, this kid forgot their homework, and somebody in the mom group would take a picture of the homework and put it in the group, and then you could print it out. And there were, I think, about 7, maybe 8 kids, and all the moms in this group. The kids weren't in the group, the moms were in the group. But I would say almost every night somebody forgot their homework, and one of us was taking a picture and texting it, So that was just the way that we did things for years. And then in 5th grade, my son was 10, and I just decided, I think I decided the night before 5th grade started, we're not going to do that this year. He's got to learn at the end of the day to look at the board and write down whatever his homework is. It's like an important life skill, to be able to manage your responsibilities. So I told him, I said, listen, we're not going to do the homework thing, the text homework, whatever. Just make sure, make it a habit now. Before you leave school, you look at the board, you write down what you need to know, and that's how it goes. And if you don't, then it'll just mean you lose recess the next day. But that's how we're going to do it this year. Goes in, I think it was like the first week he forgot, and he begged me to, text the mom group, and I wouldn't do it. And he got very upset with me, just text the group. And I wouldn't. I said, no, we're not going to do it. You're going to be okay. He's a kid that likes to have his stuff done. He doesn't like to, not follow. He's a rule. He likes to know what the rules are, and he likes to show up, with everything done. And so he was very upset. And I said, I'm not doing it. And I let him be upset with me, and he went in and, he lost recess the next day, and he never forgot to write down his homework again. So that was a win for me, very hard. I find it personally much harder to step back than I do to dive in. It's much easier for me to save the day than it is for me to sit back. It's not easy to watch people we love struggle. And the reason that I'm highlighting that this week is in case you are amongst family, there can be a tendency to try to make everything nice for everyone. My mom was so big on this. She focused so much on making things look beautiful. Everything had to look perfect. It didn't have to be perfect, but it had to look perfect and seem perfect. So if we went out as a family for Christmas or for Thanksgiving, it had to look, we all had to look, we had to dress right, we had to act right. Acting right was a big, directive from my mother. Act right. And we all knew what act right meant. It meant don't cause trouble, don't be too loud, be polite. If you're upset about something, keep it to yourself. Don't air any dirty laundry in public. And I think a big reason she had such a kind of stranglehold on the family is because of the alcoholism. We were not allowed to talk about that, address it. It just was, we were all supposed to pretend there was no problem. And what happens when you are being asked to accept a false reality is there's a disconnect, right? What is real, you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it, but you're being asked to act like all the things that you're seeing, feeling, hearing are not real, and pretend that we're in a different reality. And that is crazy making and exhausting and confusing. And when you grow up as a kid, being directed to do that over and over again, you really don't know how you feel anymore. It took me a long time. It's a big part of why I think yoga lit me up so much, is because it's so much about sensation and figuring out, how do I feel right now in this moment, this breath, what am I feeling in my body? I needed that, I needed an education in tuning in to sensation and the present moment and just being real about whatever I felt, even if it didn't feel good. I didn't have any framework for that. And so I didn't have my coping skills for dealing with uncomfortable feelings were, I was left to sort of manage that stuff on my own and make it go away. That was the job. So if we went to someone's house for a holiday and my mother was, drinking and slurring and having a hard time standing up and needing help to walk across the room. I mean, it was just, you were not supposed to act like anything was wrong. And, it was brutal. It was painful. And so even years later, when I was a grown up, those demands are kind of ingrained, and you can get into this mindset of trying to please everyone and make everybody feel okay, even if things really are not okay. And so there was,
I'll backtrack a little bit. For me personally, there were certainly no boundaries. If we went for dinner, and as I got older and I was like in my 20s, if somebody said to me, like, why aren't you married? I was like 22, or anything intrusive or inappropriate, I was not allowed to say, I'm 22, like, I'm not in a rush to get married. Or, like, I wasn't allowed to, I had to, be polite at all costs. And so, or just anything that felt like over the line, there was no space to say, I don't think I want to answer that question, which is something I would easily do today. If somebody asked me something I didn't want to answer, I would just say, yeah, I'm not going to answer that. But I didn't have the permission to do that, or the tools, or the self-esteem or the self-respect. I didn't have any of that yet. And that's part of what happens when you are taught to squash your feelings and make other people's feelings more important. Frank's feelings were more important, if we go back to the Tutu story. That's really what it came down to. For a while there, Frank's feelings about me and all of it were more important than mine, And when you are kind of primed also with an alcoholic household, but also on my dad's side, there was a lot of caretaking going on. He was, it's hard to even know what to say. My dad was an obsessive womanizer and constantly lying to cover his tracks and making me part of that. I was in on the secret and I was supposed to help him. And so definitely parentified, which is a thing that happens a lot in divorce with dads and daughters. Not always. There are a lot of really great men out there who know what to do and what not to do, and they don't burden their young daughters that way. But my dad was not one of them. And so if you grew up in that kind, sometimes it's reversed. And I was certainly doing a lot of caretaking for my mother as well. Then you're going to be an adult who's constantly doing that. And then if you have kids, the job is to do that. But my tendency has always been to do that. That's like my default, is to worry about everybody else's feelings and if everybody's going to be okay. And if they're not going to be okay, how to avoid, what can I do to make things easier? And that's just what happens in my brain, because that is how I've been wired. And it took me years and years of work, to understand that was even a thing. I didn't even, it's ingrained, right? It is your wiring. And so this is just how you are and what you do. And it took me, decades of work to recognize that I'm set up like that, and that is not actually serving me and not always helping the people around me the way that I think it might be, even my children. And so learning to step back and let them struggle was part of my growth as a mother, because I realized, to do the best by them, I had to let them not always have the problem solved. Otherwise, they're not going to have problem solving skills themselves. And I have always found that to be the much harder work. Even in my adult relationships, my close friends, my husband, I still, to this day, will worry about how other people are feeling. And sometimes it's just, it's still, that wiring is still in there. And there's a lot that can be really great about that. It's not like you want to totally wipe that stuff out. It's good to be thinking about other people and how they feel and what they need. So that's not a groove, a samskara, let's say, right, that I would want to totally wipe out, but it's something I have to manage and watch, because it can go past the point of caring about other people and into the realm of, let me try to manage, fix, solve, everything for everyone. And that is not my work. That is not my job. That's not your job. That's not any of our jobs, right? And as an example of this, just to, really illustrate what I'm talking about, last week we were supposed to have dinner with a really close friend of mine, and she lives out of state. We grew up together. We went to high school, college. We're super, super close. She's like my sister. And I hadn't seen her for 4 years. And so she was coming out just for a couple of nights, and we had a plan to go for dinner. And the day that we were supposed to go for dinner, my husband got just like not the happy, it's just annoying work news in the morning. And so the last thing you want to do when you get like news that isn't great is go socialize with people you don't really know. And he'd only met my friend once before, so like he knows her well, and she was bringing her new partner. So like a social situation. And I just knew like he didn't want to do it. But she's only here for the 2 nights. And so I'm in that thing. I'm like in the shower, getting ready to go. And I'm thinking about, I know he doesn't want to do this. We're going to have to drive through rush hour traffic. It's like all the things that like nobody wants to do. And I could just tell him like he could stay home if he wants to. But then I'm thinking about how she's going to feel if I show up at the restaurant and he isn't there. Is she going to feel like, oh, he didn't care enough to like come and spend time with me? I'm doing all this stuff in my head about what, everyone else might need or not need. And I suddenly started, I realized, I was just in the shower and I realized, wait a second, what am I doing? I'm trying to manage my husband's feelings. I'm trying to manage my friend's feelings. I'm running the scenario in my head of walking into the restaurant by myself and what I would say, would I just say he isn't feeling well, which would be true, or, would I say what had happened? I'm having a circus in my head, and I started laughing. Like, none of this is my job. None of this is my work right now. Like, it is not my work to manage whether my husband wants to come to dinner or not. It's not my work to manage whether my friend takes it personally or not. None of that is my work. The only work I have to do is to manage my own feelings about what happens if my husband decides he wants to stay home. My own disappointment. And I can handle disappointment, and I can go and have dinner by myself. I'm, very capable of doing those things. So I just kind of reminded myself, but I had to remind myself it's a practice, and I had to catch myself and realize what I was doing. I was trying to do the work of, all making everything okay for everyone. And I'm not Atlas, that's not my job, and that's not your job. And so if you are, and it was so liberating. I just got out of the shower and I was just like kind of laughing at myself, like, okay, I'm so glad I don't need to do any of that. And I went into the bedroom intending to tell my husband, like, hey, listen, honey, if you want to stay home tonight, you can totally stay home. It's fine. And he was like getting dressed and chipper and, ready to go. So that whole thing was just my own, like I said, my own circus, self-orchestrated circus, and, unnecessary, but good to catch yourself. And that's one of the things for me, and I'm not a zealot, and I think different things work for different people. But for me, I think 30 years of yoga, I catch myself pretty quickly. When I'm starting to spin like that, it's not hours that go by, it's minutes. And so you get your time back. You're not spinning and spinning and spinning for days. Maybe you're spinning for a few minutes, but you can laugh at yourself and realize you're doing it. If you are with family, during the holidays, sometimes that can overtake you, that feeling of wanting to make everything okay for everyone. And, if you are someone who maybe has a hard time being in a group setting for long periods, maybe you're a little more introverted, you want to go take a walk and get some air and quiet your mind, maybe your dad doesn't want you to do, he doesn't like that. It's okay. He can handle some discomfort or disappointment for a few minutes, and you can go and do what you need to do for your mental health. Like, that's what I mean. You don't have to take on everybody else's needs, pressures, desires. You are a human being, and you are allowed to need things, and you're allowed to want things, and you're allowed to, take care of yourself. In fact, I would say it goes beyond being allowed to. You need to. Like, it's a responsibility for all of us, for each one of us, to take care of ourselves so that we can then show up in the world with the best we have to offer. And you can't do that if you're totally depleted, or you're feeling like you're allowing your boundaries to be plowed through to please other people, or you're shrinking yourself, or you're editing out like your real emotions. I was fully prepared to go to that dinner and tell my close friend and her partner, who I don't know, you know what, my husband got really just bummer work news this morning, and he didn't feel like he was going to be good company. Because what adult can't understand that? We've all been there. I mean, as it turned out, we had the best time. We were laughing and talking, and it was so much fun. But, the more you can sort of put down, unload your plate of other people's, of trying to fix, manage, make better, avoid discomfort, the more you can just stop doing that, the more energy you're going to have. And people don't have to like your boundaries. Family, a lot of the time, if you're reimagining the role that you play in the family, there may be a lot of pushback. When I first started and moved to Los Angeles when I was 29, and that is when I really started to, do some deep work on myself. I had been doing that. There were years of prep work going on to make a move like that. It didn't happen overnight, but I put a geographical boundary there, and then I started to really have the space. And because I had the space, I started to get stronger, and I had the strength to create emotional boundaries that I desperately needed with my mom, in order to love her. It's really hard to love an alcoholic, and especially, when this person will not admit that they have a problem or get any help. So that is what enabled me to do that, was creating a boundary, and then strengthening myself, and then just starting to call out my emotional boundaries. And there was a lot of pushback at first, it was that sort of oh, you've changed. I like the old you, I was like, yeah, of course you did, because the old me was easier, the old me just did whatever you asked me to do, and the new me is not going to do that anymore. It's okay. People don't have to like everything that you're doing, or understand it, or agree with it, or sign off on it. You're your own person. And so if you are in that kind of situation this week or ever, just to really remind yourself, your work is your own feelings, to really manage that stuff, to think about how you're showing up in the world, how you're responding to what is happening around you, and as much as you can to really show up with love. At the end of the story that I was writing, I said, my mom, years later, I think it was only about, probably 4 years ago or something, my mom called me one day, and she said, you are never going to believe who I found on Facebook. And I said, who? And she's like, Frank. I'm like, Frank? And she's like, yes. And guess what? I'm like, what? She's like, he's married and he has a husband. And God bless him. I hope he's happy. But it just goes to show, Frank was probably in his own tremendous amount of pain during the time that we knew him, and, probably not living in alignment with what was true for him and real for him. He's in a relationship with a woman, and she has a kid on top of it. No wonder he didn't, want to be there dealing with that. And, it's just one of those things where there's my mother trying to buy gifts to make something better that was never going to be better. It wasn't meant to be. And what a relief it is when you can just sort of recognize that without going through the process of dancing like a monkey and, trying to bend over backwards to make everything okay for us. It's just like, no, if it's taking that much effort to try to convince people to be in a situation, they shouldn't be in the situation. You should not have to do a sales job to get someone to want to be a part of your life. If it involves a sales job, that is all the sign you need to walk the person to the door and wave them off and wish them well. No sales jobs, your life is your life. It might be messy, it might be complicated, it's probably really beautiful in so many ways, and you want to be with people who see that, recognize that, cherish it, cherish you, So it's a big holiday story there. I hope that there was something in it that was helpful to you, whether it has to do with relationships or holidays or family stuff. I know this can be, a time of year that brings up a lot of emotion for people. So I do hope that this was helpful, and I'm always here if you want to talk about any of it. Thank you for joining me for this talk.